And we are now going live. Go ahead, Laurie.
Welcome back to our second hour. This is August 14th, and this is the Utah Valley Technology and Genealogy Group. Our speakers today are Ken and Sheron Drake, and in our first hour, they were talking about secrets in your DNA, and they're going to cover a few more things about that topic and then move into their presentation, their second presentation, which is called You've Taken a DNA Test, Now What? And isn't that what a lot of us are wondering about ourselves? So take it away there, Ken and Sheron. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And okay, so just briefly to follow up from where we were discussing before about some of my experiences as an adoptee. As I mentioned, I think briefly that my biological family, I was born in California. My maternal side was very Lutheran family. Turns out they were all from Denmark. My paternal side of the family was agnostic. They'd lived in California for generations. And they came from Europe as well. But as I started to do my typical family history type of thing, I started looking at, okay, now I know my parents are, my grandparents, let's go back to my great-grandparents and start looking at where they're from. I discovered some interesting things. On my father's side, you'll probably recognize this, that this is the place monument. There's some people on that monument that are, almost everybody on there is played a significant role in the founding of Salt Lake City and bringing the pioneers across the plains. And as I started going back in my family history, I discovered that on my paternal line, direct paternal line, I'm a direct descendant of Jesse Carter Little, who was an early Mormon pioneer. He was in the Vanguard Company. He actually entered the valley on the 22nd of July, 2 days earlier than the main company, and was instrumental in many of the early things in the early saints, which we'll talk about. One of the things he did before he even came west, he was instrumental in producing one of the first hymn books in the LDS Church. When he was back there in Bellows Falls in Massachusetts. It's very significant to me because I'm a musician. I've been an organist for most of my life. And to find out that he was instrumental in the publication of the hymns and some of the first sheet music. Actually, this hymn book was the first one to actually have printed notation for the musicians as opposed to just the lyrics. Also on my maternal side, I discovered that on my mom's side, the first Icelandic settlers in Spanish Fork, Utah are in my line. They came directly from Iceland and helped settle the valley here. I started going back and looking at things and noticing that people were born in Winter Quarters, Utah. And if anybody doesn't know where Winter Quarters, Utah is, it's a little mining camp that's now a ghost town up by Scoville. Which is no longer there. The mine blew up and it was deserted years later. But that's where my family was on both. So on both sides of my family, discovered that I have early Mormon pioneer heritage. In fact, the Icelandic monument there actually has some of their names inscribed in Spanish Fork. The names of my ancestors are on the monument there in Spanish Fork. You probably also recognize this photo, the famous, they call it the champagne photo when the two railroads met at Promontory Point in Utah. They took the picture of everybody, the two trains meeting there. So interestingly, this happened on May 10th, 1869. There were other photos taken that day, not just this famous one that everybody recognizes. So one of the other photos that was taken was of some of the other dignitaries. This photo is most of the workers, the people who were left there. Notably absent are all the Chinese workers who had already left for the day. This picture apparently was taken later in the day. These are kind of the rowdies that were still hanging around at the end of the celebrations. But this photo taken earlier in the morning, we think between 10 and 11, includes some of the engineers and some of the dignitaries that were present at the joining of the tracks. Right there in the middle is this grizzly old guy who was living in Morgan at the time, which is present day Morgan, which was called Littleton at the time. That's Jesse Carter Little. He is my great-great-great-grandfather. And so, of course, when we had recently the 150th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike out at Promontory Point, with Jesse, we went out, and so that's him on the left, and I dressed up like Jesse Carter Little. So I grew out my beard, tried to get the clothes as close as possible, tried to find the place where he was standing almost exactly. So I'm trying to stand in the exact spot at almost the exact same time of day that he was 150 years earlier. And it was just a fantastic event to be able to be there and to kind of recreate that historical moment from one of my ancestors. Just kind of cool that discovered, even though I was born in Los Angeles, that I had early Utah pioneer history in my background. All right, so let's jump to the next one. So this just real quick summary. Why do you want to do a DNA test? One is to validate and affirm your existing well-documented family tree. It's like Sheron's case, right? She had a big extensive tree, well-documented, and we were able to use DNA to validate the information that we had. And we're still in that process. You can see of a few other little branches that we're still looking for some DNA confirmation. Also, though, you can also extend and enrich the branches in your existing family tree. Finding all these cousins and adoptees, people that you think your tree is complete, but it may not be. All right, and the further back you go, and and the more connections you can make, the more people you potentially can find. We'll talk about next about how you can do that. And then, of course, by doing your DNA, like Sheron did hers, you can help people like me to connect with their origins and families, because we have to match with somebody. So even though I had no family tree, somebody else had to take the test. And if I could connect with somebody like Sheron, who has an extensive tree, that can help me put myself in that structure, then it makes it so much easier in order to do that. All right. So let's see if I can switch over to the other presentation real quick here. Actually, I'm going to go here. I guess I'm going to start the next presentation. Where did it go? Part 2. That is it. Hopefully you're seeing the next screen. Okay. Can somebody validate that?
Sharing is paused.
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
The biggest revolutionary change.
Can
Yes.
we see your control screen, not the main screen?
Yeah, you want to put it to slideshow.
F5 or go to the right screen.
Okay. Make sure that's doing it right.
There you go.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The biggest revolution, I mean, all of you probably, I've been doing genealogy for a long time, but the biggest change in the last 10 years clearly is this idea of genetic genealogy. So let's really quickly, I'll do some quick background on all of this. What tests are available, right? So you can take a mitochondrial DNA test with family tree DNA. Why would you do that? Well, a mitochondrial DNA tests your mother's mother line, and anybody can take that test. We all inherit mitochondrial DNA, men and women both, but it only will reveal information on that matrilineal line. Likewise, men can take a Y-DNA test, but it will only reveal information of your father's 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 father. Now, why would you do either one of those tests? Well, fortunately, because of the way DNA is inherited, both mitochondrial and Y-DNA does not recombine each generation. And so it doesn't change nearly as rapidly as autosomal DNA or normal DNA. And so the ability to accurately identify very long historic lines on either of those tests is very valuable if you have a genetic question or genealogical question that lies along those periphery of the male line only or the female line only. So there are reasons to take either one of those tests. However, autosomal DNA is the one that most of us are talking about. Ancestry DNA is an autosomal test, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, and a few others. We'll talk about some of those. That tests everybody in between, not just your mother's mother's mother, not your father's father. But as you can see in the image here, I try to show that it fades over time. The ability to make an accurate genetic connection with ancestors who are back more than 6 or 7 generations is limited. And so what we're really looking at is making connections within that 5 to 6 generations time period. But that's more than adequate usually to be able to make some amazing discoveries. You can see here that I kind of, each generation, the amount of DNA that you inherit from each generation is halved as you go back. So you get 50% of your DNA from your father, but you only get 25% from your grandfather and 12.5 from your great grandfather, and you go back. It starts to diminish rapidly. That causes some problems. Now, the other thing that if any of you have taken a DNA test, you probably hear this word bantered about quite a bit. What's a centum organ, and why should I care? And the simple answer to that is a centum organ is just a measurement of how much DNA you share with another person. And there's a complex formula because each chromosome has a different amount and ratio, but you can basically say that it's a ratio or a percentage of the DNA you share with another person. This chart is a fantastic chart. It's available on DNA Painter. We'll actually talk about that a little bit, that tool and how to use it. But it shows you here you are in the middle. And then if you go up, you can see your parent. And what these numbers mean is that that's how much DNA you share in centum organs with that generation. So for instance, the parent says 3485. That's the average number of centum organs you will share with a parent. And they also show the numbers below that shows the range of potential centum organs you may share with a parent. So it could be as low as 2376 or as high as 3720 with an average of 3485. So if you look at to the right of yourself, that's that 1C, that's a first cousin. So on average, if you take a test with your first cousin, you will share 866 centum organs with a cousin, but it could be as low as 396 or as high as 1397. And this is done through the DNA project, where it's looked at literally hundreds and thousands of people who've taken DNA tests between known relationships. They've tabulated all the information and they've come up with these are the ranges that we see. This is updated probably on a yearly basis now. The ranges seem to be expanding over time as we get more and more use cases. The interesting thing is if you continue over to the right, sorry, let's go back. On this chart, first cousin, 866, second cousin, 229, the third cousin, you usually will share 37 centum organs. But you'll see in the range below that there are cases where a known third cousin and you may not share any DNA at all. It could be as low as 0. And that's an important thing to remember, that just because you don't share DNA with somebody when they're at a certain genetic distance doesn't mean you're not related. It could, because again, of this idea of recombination, that as you get more and more distant, you may or may not inherit, because every time DNA recombines between the father and the mother, there's a shuffling or a recombination event that occurs. And so in many cases, you'll find that with distant relatives, you may not share any DNA with them at all. Now, the converse is true, that if you are a member of a community or family that has a lot of endogamy, meaning that they've been marrying within the same family group over and over and over for many generations, the amount of DNA that you share may be much higher for the actual relationship. So you could have, in some cases, in a highly endogamous community, a third cousin where you share, you can see 234 centum organs instead of 73 on average. In some cases, we see even higher ones in these highly endogamous communities. So the amount of DNA that you share does not always directly say or indicate what the relationship is. And so this chart, I'm a data guy. I like data. This chart is mapping out these shared DNA amounts by relationship. And so up here, and you see in the 3,000 range that if you share 3,000 centum organs with another person, we are 99.9% sure that that is either a parent or a child, right? No question about it. You're certainly not going to be a second cousin if you share that much DNA. And you can see that these have quite a bit of separation in these higher amounts, but you can see that it starts to overlap more and more as we get down here because of these, again, recombination and shuffling, that as you get down here in this lower amount, I call this the zone of confusion, right? So if you find a DNA match and you share 100 centum organs with that person, well, okay, that could mean that you have a half cousin or a first cousin or a second cousin. We don't know what that relationship is. And so unless we can do additional testing of additional people and things, it's very difficult to be able to identify what that relationship is when you have a match in that region. And the fact is that when we take DNA tests and look at our matches, the vast majority of our matches usually fall in that zone of confusion because we have many more people that are potential matches in that area as they become more distant. And so many people get the results and they see all these matches in the 100 to 200 centum organ range or lower, and they're completely confused because they have no idea what it means. And that's because it's hard to know what it means if you just rely on that single match. All right, so we'll get into that in just a minute. But who should you test? You obviously should test yourself. In my case, as soon as I made the connection, I started testing. I tested everybody. So you've seen this picture before. I tested my grandmother. I tested my aunts. I tested my siblings. I tested my kids. Do I need to test my kids? Not really. It was interesting to do, verify that they are our kids. But it was fascinating also to see, again, this idea of recombination, because when you look at some of the ethnicity, my kids, they all came from the same two parents. But in some cases, they had significantly different ethnicity analysis. It's just because of that shuffling. Each one of them got a different amount of me and a different part of Sheron. And so there's some discrepancies there. Likewise, on my maternal side, I tested everybody, every living relative I know, I have tested. Now, why would I do that? There's some investment in doing that. Not only are these people in these pictures, I've also attempted to reach out to grand aunts and second cousins. Anybody I've been able to identify as a biological relative, I have tested. And we'll show you some of the reasons for that. When should you test? Well, again, we flew out to Hawaii to meet my grandmother the day she turned 94, because we weren't sure if we were going to have a chance to ever meet her again. 94, every day is precious. And of course, what did I get her for her birthday? I got her a DNA test. So not only so we could validate the relationship, but by testing the oldest living people in your known biological tree, again, because of recombination, they have DNA that you don't. So you can take your test, but I only inherited 25% of her DNA. So the remaining 75%, if I didn't have her test, I would be missing out on, and the potential matches that could come from that 75% that I don't have. So certainly test all of the oldest people you can in your family. They are the greatest store of DNA information you have access to. And then you can broaden out to other people in the family. Again, cousins, second cousins, uncles and aunts, that type of thing. Why would you do that? Well, again, so I see a question from Marilyn. When you pay for the test, how do you get the individual's DNA results? That depends on the company. With Ancestry, there is a simple way for a person to share their DNA with you. If we want, we can actually go through. I can show you where that is. So you are the owner of the DNA test. You can set it up. With Ancestry, their security policy has changed recently in the last couple of years, where the person registering the Ancestry DNA kit has to have a unique email address. And so generally that means that, if it's an older person who doesn't do email or doesn't use a computer, that can be problematic. And so there's actually some tricks that I use to do that. If you have a Gmail address with Google, there's a trick you can use with your email address by adding a plus and then your own name or something to distinguish it from the original. So in my case, my Gmail address is ken.drakeman@gmail. If I wanted to create a unique new email address for registering a kid at Ancestry, I do ken.drake plus, and then I put the name of the person I'm administering the kit for, and I register the kit. I paid for the kit, I registered the kit, but I give them, but they do the spit. So I get permission from them to do that, right? Well, if this is, for instance, Alice is a good case here. My grandmother, she didn't know how to use Ancestry or computer, any of that. So we did that for her, and I administer her kit. If the person you're buying the kit for, you can also they can register the kit in their name, and then they can grant you access to the DNA results. They can even make you a manager of the results. They can share on different levels. But if they can't or are unable to do that themselves, there's a trick you can do, and you use the Gmail trick. I probably shouldn't do that, but I don't work for Ancestry, so that's the trick I use. All right, where should you test? Well, we talked, there's lots of different DNA companies: Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, Living Team. Those are the big five. There's also some others. I put them down below, other places you can test. But the vast majority of people, we recommend that you test at Ancestry and 23andMe. And the reason I say both of those is because those two companies, one, have the largest pool of testers, people to connect with, and neither of them at this point allow you to upload your results from other sites. So I can take a test with Ancestry, and I can download the data from Ancestry, and I can upload it to Family Tree or to MyHeritage or to Living DNA, but I cannot upload it to 23andMe. And that's the same for 23andMe. You can download it and upload to the other ones, but you cannot upload it to Ancestry. So if you want to, what we call, play in all the pools and expand your pool of potential matches, the recommendation is that you test with Ancestry and 23andMe both, because
especially if you're an adoptee.
Especially if you're an adoptee, because that will give you access to their private pools. And then you can upload that information, download it from them, and upload it to the other sites, either for free or for a nominal charge, without having to take another test. Now, GEDmatch is the one site that you don't test with. GEDmatch is what I call the Switzerland of DNA, because they accept tests from everybody. They don't actually offer tests. Now, somebody mentioned about the Y-DNA testing. So that's correct. So Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree, MyHeritage, Living DNA all do autosomal DNA testing. They do not do mitochondrial or Y-DNA testing. The only company at this point that offers full Y testing and full mitochondrial testing is Family Tree DNA. So if you want to do either of those tests, Family Tree DNA is the place you have to go.
This is Rayanne. Can I make a comment?
Sure, please.
I just finished this week the East European Family History Conference, and their recommendation, because Eastern Europe is such a tricky place to research anyway, Ancestry, they recommend, of course, testing with Ancestry, and because they've got, large pool, but then transferring to MyHeritage.
Absolutely.
Make sure you get there, because MyHeritage is the one that most Europeans.
That is absolutely good point. I was going to get to that. That you're absolutely right. MyHeritage, based in Israel, they have done much more marketing and have much better penetration and awareness outside of the North American market.
Right.
So we absolutely, especially anybody that has Europe, I mean, most of us do, right? If we're immigrants from Europe, we also have European ancestry. And so that's a good point that Sheron and I both have discovered connections on MyHeritage that we did not discover on Ancestry or 23andMe.
Well, and the Eastern European really the focus there. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And Living DNA, they're based in London. They are beginning to have a presence outside of the UK as well. They're marketing more to some of those areas. But my experience with them has so far has been rather limited. They have a very small pool. There's some interesting things that they're doing, but so you're absolutely right. So the recommendation is for anybody, my recommendation is if you have the money, test with Ancestry and 23, and then upload to all the other sites, including GEDmatch, because GEDmatch is the only site that allows connections between all of them. So I call it the Switzerland of matching. Now, real quick, this is from a little while ago, from last year. You can kind of see how the databases individually have grown. You can see that Ancestry is much larger pool. 23andMe is picking up, and you can see in the last several years, MyHeritage is starting to make progress. And I don't have the data from 2021, but all the numbers have gone up. Although somewhat you can see these exponential curves on these. Has somewhat flattened out a little bit. I guess, in some markets it's saturated and it's not growing as quickly as it was in the past in those early days back in the 2016, 2017, 2018 time period. All right. And again, so this is the idea of using GEDmatch. GEDmatch accepts data from everybody and allows you to connect there. However, it requires you to put your data there. So GEDmatch's pool size is not as big as Ancestry because only a fraction of the Ancestry members have uploaded to GEDmatch, only a fraction 23andMe, and so forth. I'll also mention just briefly that there has been some pushback with GEDmatch because they were famously or infamously the ones responsible for providing some of the information that companies like Parabon use for police purposes of tracking down these unsolved cases. So like the Golden State Killer in California, Parabon and CC Moore used GEDmatch data to be able to identify the suspect, which was later identified as the perpetrator of all those killings. So some people have felt that the fact that law enforcement uses GEDmatch to track some of these cases down is a violation of their privacy. GEDmatch has changed their policy, so now you actually have to opt into law enforcement use of your data. But many people, kind of remove their data, and so they've had a tougher road to hoe because less people are moving to that tool than were in the past. But it's still a great tool. There's some things you can do on GEDmatch. It's completely free at a basic level. There's some advanced features if you pay for it as well. All right, so we talked about this before. Be prepared for surprises. I won't go through that. Let's talk but we're running out of time. I have to talk fast. So why would you take a DNA test? We'll get into. There are some health reasons to take a DNA test, right? 23andMe offers some health analysis, some general health analysis from your DNA test. Ancestry was offering some health analysis, but they have since stopped doing that. So if you did it in the past, you could opt into that, but you can no longer get Ancestry health information, or they're about to cut it off. I can't remember when the cutoff is. However, any DNA test that you take from any of the sites can be uploaded to companies such as Promethease or CodeGen. Promethease is a small fee, CodeGen is free, and you can basically take your DNA and it compares your DNA with a database of all of the known potential genetic markers that are in there and what their medical importance could be. Now, I'll make a caveat with that because as we know, any of the autosomal DNA tests about 700,000 markers or SNPs of our DNA. That is a small subset of our entire genome. Each of us has about 3 billion base pairs in our DNA. And so we're getting a fraction of a percent when we do a genetic genealogy DNA test. So it doesn't cover all the potential health issues, but it can be indicative of some things that you may want to have further true genetic screening from. So I've taken all of our DNA. Some of the interesting things was it will tell you some of the things about drug sensitivities, drug effectiveness, other different things about who you are and what you're. I mean, some of the things that 23andMe does, like oh, you have blue eyes. You go, okay, well that's cool. I knew I had blue eyes. You didn't need to tell me that. Oh, you have this type of earlobe. I already knew that, right? It's interesting to see that they can tell that from DNA, but the true health things about do you have the BRCA gene? Are you likely to have this particular cancer. There are some things that these general screenings can be indicative of, and more doctors are accepting some data from Promethease or CoGen as a preliminary screening for health reasons. All right, what's the other thing you might want to do? Well, everybody's familiar with the famous ethnicity estimate, but each of the companies does a very different approach. From a genealogical perspective, ethnicity estimates are interesting and occasionally helpful. If you know you're researching an area and you want to see what your ethnicity is, you might find a surprise. You go, oh, I didn't know that I had anybody in the south of France, and then so you might focus your research in that area to discover something. But generally speaking, like I say, it's a useful if you're stumped for a Halloween costume idea and you want to know what your ethnicity is. It's not a great tool for really identifying where your people come from necessarily. Most ethnicity estimates on the test are looking back about 1,000 to 1,500 years, which is kind of often outside of our genealogical research window. But some of the ones can be interesting. And then, of course, family matching is the important thing. That's the real power of DNA. We'll talk more about that. So, boy, I have very limited time. So this is an interesting thing. This is an ethnicity analysis of a friend of mine who is of mixed race, as you probably could assume from looking at the chart here. So the question is, if this was your ethnicity analysis, what box would you check on the census? It gets a little interesting, right? Basically the point is that we all come from a variety of places and a variety of backgrounds. And one of the most powerful things about doing the DNA testing, I think, is this idea of helping to reduce racism. And I wanted to just to briefly show, you probably have seen this video before, but this is a brief thing about a company that did a quick little test with a group of people about their ethnic backgrounds.
I'm proud to be English. My family have served and we've defended this country and we've been to war for this country.
I'm really patriotic about Bangladesh.
Well, I am 100% Icelandic, yeah, definitely.
This is a Kurdish wedding with my mom in the traditional Kurdish clothes.
We're just proud black, so that's it.
Yeah, I think we are probably the best country in the world, if I'm honest.
Think about other countries and other nationalities in the world. Are there any that you don't feel you get on with well, or you won't like particularly?
Germany, yeah. I'm not a fan of the Germans.
You might think they're a little bit...
Particularly India and Pakistan, probably, because of the whole, the conflict.
Because I have this side of me that hates Turkish people. Not people, but the government.
But French?
No. We're just the best, it's just fact.
I'm more important than you. I don't know you, but in my opinion, I am strong and I am more important than a lot of people.
How would you feel about taking a journey based on your DNA?
Yeah, I feel very intrigued.
What could you possibly tell me that I don't know?
So do you know how DNA works? So you get half from mum and half from dad, so 50% from each of them, and they get 50% from their parents, and back and back and back. And all those little bits of your ancestor, they filter down to make you. I need you to spit in this tube for me. You spit up to the little black line.
That's a lot of spit.
Right, the story of you is in that tube. What's it gonna tell me?
It's gonna be, oh yeah, you're French, and wait, your grandparents are French, and wait.
100% Bengali.
Solid Iraqi.
I'm Cuban.
You're gonna tell me that I'm English, like I've told you.
Jay, can you come down and join us?
I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say.
So you ready to find out your results? Will you read it out to us, please?
Wow, look at me.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. Shit, I didn't expect that.
All of them.
Whoa. No.
Caucasus, which was Turkish.
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece.
I'm 32% British.
What?
Great Britain, 30%. Can we 5% German?
I'm Irish.
Yeah.
So I'm a Muslim Jew.
Great Britain, 11%. Are you sure these results are mine?
Eastern Europe?
Iceland has definitely moved closer to Europe now.
I'm gonna go a bit far right now, but this should be compulsory. There would be no such thing as like extremism in the world if people knew their heritage like that. Like, who would be stupid enough to think of such thing as like a pure race?
In a way, we're all kind of cousins, in a broad sense. In a much more direct sense, you have a cousin in this room. Turn around and guess who it is. Wash,
Yeah. What's that?
why don't you come down here and meet your cousin?
God, this is the best.
Did you know that?
I didn't know I did. This is like, my heart's pounding right now, I swear to God. We met.
I'm Jay from everywhere by the reason of this.
I'm a real man of the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
All right. So hopefully, maybe most of you hadn't seen that before. To me, that's one of the more powerful messages of doing DNA and understanding what our backgrounds are and where we come from. A powerful thing. Any questions or comments at this point? I know we're kind of at the top of the hour.
Yeah, Ken, back on your DNA for health reasons, there's a major study going on here in the state of Utah that the headquarters are in St. George. They built a big building down there. I think Stephen Nadel, I believe, is in charge of it, where they will do a complete genome analysis of everybody that volunteers to do it. It's completely free. And they hope to get, I think it's 500,000 volunteers, particularly from Utah, but from anywhere. And they will do the analysis, and they call it this precision medicine. If they find that there's a particular problem in your DNA that they can predict that you're liable to have a heart attack by age 60, or you're liable to do this, that, or the other, they will notify you. Otherwise, they will not, and then they will give you some counseling as to what to do. But it's completely free, and if you don't hear from them, then there's no, they don't know any way, or nothing in your DNA is anything they can do about now. Right. There are places all around here in Utah County and elsewhere, Salt Lake, where you can do the test. They take, and when we had a family reunion in St. George, I had all my kids and me tested so that they ran the whole thing through.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to know how full of I mean, are they doing full exome? Do you know they're doing all three?
They do the complete genome, but they won't tell you. And I said, well, can you use some of the DNA tests from 23andMe or Ancestry? And they said, no, those are all copyrighted by those companies, so we can't use those. So we have to do our own. But they do the complete thing, and it may take a year for them to do it.
Yeah,
but
so I'm aware that there are some companies you can now, if you want to pay for it, do your own complete exome DNA analysis. The price has dramatically dropped over time. It used to be, several $1,000s, then it got down to $2,000. The last I saw that you can do this on your own, pay for it, and get your results, whether they're positive or negative. It's so big they have to give you a hard drive with the information on it. And the cheapest I saw last Christmas was $200.
Boy, that's cheap.
for a complete DNA test. And as you're probably aware that both Ancestry and 23andMe, they are also now leveraging some of their data for other medical testing as well. Obviously, they have a limited slice, like we mentioned, not the full genome. So that's interesting that somebody at least recognizes that we need to get the full exome to do a full medical screen. It's interesting that they'll tell you if they found a problem, but they won't give you the data. It's your data, so I don't know about that.
Intermountain Healthcare is involved with it. The big building that they built is right by the hospital in St. George. It's a $75 million building. It's just completed a year ago, and it's in connection with Stanford University.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's fascinating to know. I'll have to look into that. All right, so we're kind of out of time. There's always tons of more things we could talk about, but I just want to open up to any other questions. I don't want to go over.
Hey, Ken, why don't you plan on taking another 15?
Okay, I'd be happy to do that.
Because we didn't start till, 11:17 or something.
Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to stop. I'm going to share a different window and actually look at go to my web browser. We're going to talk about this. Where did it go? Well, let's do that one. Hopefully you can see the browser. Tell me if you can, when you can see the Ancestry homepage.
Yeah, we can see your browser. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's the DNA homepage. Yeah.
Yep, good. So I just wanted to, in the last little bit, talk about, how do we do some of these things and why do we test and the way we test, why do I test some of the tools out there. So really quickly, so I have tested with Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, the whole kit and caboodle here. Nope. But I wanted to let's dive in really quickly to a couple. Let's start with GEDmatch. Why would you upload to GEDmatch? So GEDmatch is a great tool because you can upload from any and all of those different sites and make connections. So when I look at and then you can drill into your results. Oops, looks like I need to log in again. Come on. So this may not be as friendly as Ancestry or MyHeritage. Their interface is a little more data focused, but it's the same basic premise that tells you your matches ranked by genetic proximity. So it tells you, how many centum organs you share here in this total centum organs column. You can see that, like back to the chart we looked at, how much do I share with my kids? So this is my son, 3587, and so forth. So you can see, all the people, and you can notice by the email address that I've uploaded a whole lot of files to GEDmatch to see who my matches are. But you can also tell by the prefix of the kit number where that kit came from. So if it starts with an A, it came from Ancestry. If it starts with an M, it came from 23andMe. And some of the other ones, Family Tree Maker, you can see that some of these kits or matches came from sources outside of Ancestry. So these are people that I matched fairly closely with who did not take a test on Ancestry, who I may not have even known I matched with if I hadn't uploaded to GEDmatch. So it's a great tool to do that. Somebody asked, am I available at the Limited Family History Center? Absolutely. So I work, my current role, I'm the ward temple and family history leader in my ward. Sheron's a consultant, but yes, we do work with the Linden Family History Center. If they know that they need some help, Carol knows to reach out to me. I don't have a time slot currently where I'm there all the time, but as far as a resource to do some of these things, I'm absolutely always willing to help anybody and everybody. We help a lot of people. Yeah. The other interesting thing on GEDmatch, besides just matching with other people, is that often people will discover in their matches, they go, this is really strange. I match people on my mom's side and my dad's side who are the same people. And they start to wonder, Is it possible that my parents are related? And there's a kind of really quick little tool in GEDmatch called Are My Parents Related? And you basically just put in your kit number and it will tell you, it can analyze just your DNA by itself. It doesn't need any other kit. You just put that number in there, submit it, and it'll look at all your DNA and it'll tell you, it can tell you if your parents are closely related. So it's a great way to calm your nerves or cause a lot of anxiety, maybe, depending on what your results are, I guess. But it just quickly and easily looks at your segments in common and can tell if your parents are related. Now, there have been a handful of people that I've known that have taken that, done that little process and discovered that, and that the parents end up being second cousins, sometimes even closer.
Yeah.
But that's a great little tool. Now, the other thing I'll mention with GEDmatch that I have found useful in my case, because as I mentioned before, my father had passed away before I ever met him. And so they actually have a tool that you pay for in their tier 0 features here called the Lazarus tool. And what that does kind of automagically is you put in, again, this is one of the ways you test a lot of people, you put in the DNA of your close relatives. In my case, because I had my paternal grandmother, my 2 paternal aunts, and 2 siblings. So I put in all of our DNA of all these known relatives, and I put it into this tool, and it can, as accurately as possible, recreate the DNA from my father, even though he didn't take a test. It resurrects, that's why they call it the Lazarus tool. It resurrects his DNA and makes it available for matching, which is kind of a cool thing. It does require, again, that you have several other close family members tested. But if you do that and you test the right people, then you can rebuild the DNA of a deceased person. Kind of an amazing thing.
Could you
also, yep, question?
I was going to say, could you, if you just put in your DNA plus your mother's DNA, couldn't they siphon it out that way?
So you can do a little bit, but this particular tool is attempting to recreate more because, again, you can't just from your DNA, well, you can't get 50%, right? But this, in my dad's case, we got about 88% of his DNA recreated.
Cool.
So that's right. And that's also an important thing. So when we look at DNA, let me just look at Ancestry. Let's look at my matches. So I've tested a lot of people obviously you've seen the things, so I've tested all my kids, my cousins. So when I get a new match, so if I look at, a new match comes in that's unviewed, the ability to identify that match through shared matches. And so here's a person that you can see the little blue dot. For these, that the blue dot means that this is an unviewed match. So this is a match on Ancestry that I've never looked at before. So we're going to do this in real time. Let's just take a look at this person. Don't know who this person is. We share 20 centum organs. So if I go to, and I'll just do this really quick. If I go to DNA Painter, Tools, see if I'm logged in and there's this chart. I can actually type in 20 centum organs. If I have a 20 centum organ match, these are the potential relationships with the 20 centum organ match, right? So they're saying that there's a 58% probability that this person is maybe a sixth cousin, or it could be a fourth cousin once removed, or it could be a seventh cousin, or it could be any one of these, right? So we don't know. So I use this to narrow down. Okay, well, I know here's me, and given the age of this match, it could be a third cousin, or it could be a fourth cousin. Usually off the top of my head, if I see a 20 centum organ match, I think that's probably fourth cousin or more distant. The Ancestry is estimating this at a fifth to eighth cousin. So how do I know where they fit in my tree? Well, so the first thing I will do is I'll go to shared matches and I go, who else in my family matches this person? And I go, of course, my kids match her because I match her. That's not a surprise. But in this case, I can see that my paternal grandmother matches her and my paternal aunt. So already I can knock out 25 or 75% of my tree and say, this person matches on this branch of my tree. And so often I'll do that and I'll just add a note. So I can say, okay, well, this person matches. This is an Alice Jones, if I spell it right, an Alice Jones match. And so when I start going back and looking at Alice Jones matches, I can filter on that. And I go, okay, well, here's another person who matches with Alice. And then I can also drill into her, and I can say, well, I match her at 20 Centum Organs. How much does Alice match her at? Maybe it's close, maybe it's not. So I have Alice, I manage her DNA, and she matches only at 21 Centum Organs. So that's interesting. When I see that my grandmother matches it barely more than I do, that generally means that this is a more distant match. So if she was closer, maybe fourth cousin as opposed to a sixth cousin, again, because of the halving or the doubling of DNA, if I saw that my mom matched her at 40 Centum Organs, and then my grandmother matched her at 80 Centum Organs, again, doubling, I go, okay, well, this is a normal close match because we're halving the DNA every along the way. Because I see that my grandmother matches with about the same distance that I do, then, okay, well, maybe this is more distant match. And that helps me narrow down the places to start looking. And then maybe I'd reach out to her through a text, say, I see that we match on my sign. Let's look at your tree. Do you have, and I know that Alice here comes from Ireland and England. Do you have any people in your tree that are similar to that? And I'll just begin the process of our normal genealogical paper research, right? And looking for records and shared things. And so the DNA is a big hint that helps me focus my research. So even for these unknown people that often I can put them into the tree. Now, let me show you the way I often will do that. So this is an example. Sheron showed you her whiteboard. I use a tool. It's like Visio. It's free. It's called Draw.io. It's on the internet. You can use it.
And just so you know, this lady that he's pointing out is a neighbor of ours, but also my fourth cousin that I didn't know until she did her DNA.
Yeah. So this person here in gold, Shauna Beagley, who I have permission from her to share this story. Her father is an adoptee, and he died young, so she never had any information about her father's family. So she came to us and she said, I took a DNA test, and is there any way you can help, maybe figure out who my dad's father was? And so we started looking at matches. And the way I do this is I start just looking at all of her shared matches and then doing typical genealogical research. Well, okay, here's somebody that she matches at 537 Centum Organs named Doylene Graham. And I start doing, okay, well, what do we know about her? Well, maybe I can find out that, I found out who her father was. And then I look at census records and find out who her father was. I start looking at families, and you just start looking at all the possible relationships and putting it out here and get more and more shared matches. And it's a big puzzle. You're trying to put together the pieces, and the more pieces you have, the more complete the picture can become. And this took me 2 days, a couple days, of looking at all the shared matches, again, with GEDmatch and Ancestry and family search history, and looking at censuses. And we were able to determine who her parents, her dad's parents were, and miraculously discovered that her grandmother was still alive and living in Provo. And this is back to Marilyn's earlier comments. She reached out to her, and she was older, not in good health, and she was able to at least talk to her, but her grandmother never completely admitted the relationship. She never acknowledged the relationship officially because, again, she was older. She had been told to forget about, the fact that she relinquished a baby. This is the narrative that the family services and the Catholic nuns and everything says, put this episode of your life behind you and forget about it and never talk about it. And that's what she was told to do. But DNA again, revealed the truth of the story, and we were able to uncover and this is a very long and complex story, but she had gotten pregnant while her husband was deployed in the military.
World War II.
And he came back, divorced her, she gave up the child, and then married the father afterwards, and had other children. So Shauna has an aunt who's a full aunt that she didn't know about. And so it's been a miraculous reunion of the story. Vita finally passed away, but Shauna has been able to contact and be in touch with cousins and uncles and aunts that she never knew. And it's just been just an amazing story. So that does happen, can happen. And
Ken?
Yes.
We have two things on Facebook comments. Here's one from Linda. I've heard that it can be a bad idea to do it because your health and life insurance might refuse to insure you.
That's
You want to comment on that?
Sure. So as far as we know, that health insurance it's illegal for health insurance to use any DNA testing. I mean, again, when you test with these companies, they're all private. They do not share the information with anybody else. However, I am aware that life insurance companies do not have the same restrictions. So if this is a gray area, so they don't have access to this data. However, I am aware that some life insurance companies now ask if you've taken a DNA test and if you've done a health screening. You do not have to tell them the results, or you can say, but so that's a gray area that the legislation, as far as I'm aware, is working on right now. So life insurance, iffy, health insurance is illegal for them to use this information currently in all 50 states.
Thank you. There is a question from Anne. Where is the best resource to learn more about the science of DNA testing and comparison?
Actually, Ancestry has little snippets that you can look on their website.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Now there's so for those of you who know, there's a gentleman named Blaine Bettinger. He is kind of considered within the community as maybe the best source for, he has a couple of books. They're available on Amazon. He has a website. There's actually a couple of different websites that have a lot of information. So the places I would start with Ancestry. They have an Ancestry Academy that has lots of articles that can kind of get you an introduction to it. And then I would look at, and this is a plug for RootsTech. RootsTech in the last year was virtual. All of their recordings are posted there. There were probably 20 or so classes on DNA at RootsTech. And so there's a good resource as well, that some of them talked about the science. Some of the scientists from Ancestry and some of the other companies were there and presented. They'll talk about some of the work that they're doing. That's a good resource as well. And then again, following up with things like Blaine Bettinger or DNA explained.com is a good resource as well. There's lots of information on the web. And I'll put this out there. I'll make myself available if you want to, share on your blog, our contact information. We're more than happy to be available for anybody and everybody to help. We can help answer questions, help point you in the right direction. Glad to be of service wherever we can.
Sheron, why don't you post the email address in the chat for those on Zoom, and I'll post it over into the comments on Facebook. I had a question, Ken, if you want to take a couple. You talked about the verifying procedure for your tree. Yep. And how Sheron did that, and you mentioned some of the steps here that you were using, which are a part of that. You want to go into some of the other things you do?
Yeah. So
for doing verification? That's
a good question. So there's a couple different interesting tools on different sites. I'll use Ancestry because that's the one we use the most. All of the sites do this. So you can certainly look at this idea of shared matches, right? So who do you share matches with? But Through Lines on Ancestry is a great resource to give you a beginning source of validating your lines. So for instance, this is my Through Lines analysis. And what Through Lines does, let's look at this particular one. Yeah, that's probably a good, decent one. So Mary Elizabeth Little, if I wanted to validate that she indeed is my second great grandmother. So I know that I have DNA matches to myself, but this may not be a good one because it's pretty limited. Let me look at it. Basically, you're looking for, if you want to validate somebody that far back, you kind of need to be able to look at additional lines of connection. So let's maybe, that's a small one too. Let's go back further. All right, this is probably a good one. This is a great one. Okay, so I have my tree that I've been able to document up here, but maybe I don't know if he really is my third great grandfather, or that I have the right people in the branches. So by looking at through lines and additional matches that confirm different branches of your tree. Now, like many of you probably have worked with through lines, and often, I'll be honest, often through lines is incorrect because it's making assumptions about family trees based on DNA and the family trees that other people have posted to Ancestry. And as we all know, lots of trees everywhere
Are inaccurate.
Are inaccurate. Starting with family search. Sheron can tell you stories about how people mess up her tree all the time. She tries to correct it. And we have DNA evidence that shows that this is the way it should be, and people go in and change it.
And they still want to delete it.
And they still go in and delete it, even though it's documented. So that with that big caveat that through lines is an indicative hint that you can begin to use to validate the data. So what this can tell you is that, okay, I've got on this line here. So this is me and my whole line, this is which I have been able to document with DNA back pretty far. And here's my, obviously I took a DNA test between my mom. We pretty much know who her dad was and her dad, but maybe I don't know these people back here. So by using through lines, I can look at the additional DNA matches and go, oh, I've got all these other matches that through these trees. And again, using this as a hint and a direction to begin to document your tree and their tree using standard genealogical proof standards. This gives you a framework and a structure and a hypothesis for what your tree could be to validate. And if you can validate that the well-documented trees from them and you, then you can essentially validate that, this is my third great grandfather. That's kind of how we do this, is we look at peripheral DNA documented trees to help establish that you don't have an NPE somewhere. And what happens is sometimes you see mistakes, you think it's a mistake and you go, oh, well, okay, so grandpa wasn't grandpa. And you see all these other matches, and then you have to look at the matches and then focus and then start building the potential tree out that way. And that's kind of how I start. Does that give you a good hint?
And you can also add these DNA matches to your tree. Once you have verified everything, you can add a whole branch because you've found out who those descendants are, which is really kind of cool. Yeah,
so you're probably familiar, or maybe not, that now Ancestry has the ability to put a little DNA icon on people in your tree that is basically DNA verified. So I can see that here's me, but there's my sister, my brother, my mom, my aunt, my great aunt, my grandmother. So these are people that I have validated with direct DNA matching, not inferred DNA matching, but at least gives you, okay, that I know these are the people that I've tested and I can match them up and show that actual verified match on my tree. Which is also kind of a nice thing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't want to take up too much time. I think we're almost at the bottom of the hour here. This has been really fun. Again, we're more than happy to help anybody out. Glad to be able to share a little bit of what our story and what we do and how we do it and why we do it and the impact this can have. This is truly an exciting time when these tools are available to us and we have the ability to make some of these breakthroughs in our brick walls that we have on our trees. And hopefully this was useful to everybody.
Ken, I've posted for those of you on Zoom your Gmail address into the chat. People will want to pick that up if they have questions before we end the session.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure if everybody is like me, then your brain is sort of spinning on some more questions you need to do some more investigating on. I was looking at my Ancestry matches while you were talking and thinking about a couple things. So thank you very much. I'm sure that there will be some people contacting you to ask further questions, and I might be one of them. Who knows?
That'd be great. Happy to do it.
Ken,
So,
we had one other question online in Facebook.
What was that?
Asking where the video clip came from, where you they talked about the DNA ethnicity.
Yeah, so that was done by a travel company called Momodo, M-O-M-O, Momodo. It's on YouTube. You can search for it, DNA, Ancestry, Momodo, I think. Yeah, it was done a few years back. Very powerful.
Yeah.
And other companies have done something. Living DNA has done a similar project with elementary school kids. I think there's one that they've done recently. So it's but I love that video just because it's kind of powerful. Shows we're all a mix of some sort.
It's usually available during the day
Yeah.
if somebody needs something answered, where Ken works full time. So
okay, very good.
just so you know.
I had just one question. So I didn't forget it just now. Oh, it was about living DNA. I'm heavily British, apparently, and would it be useful to go ahead and test with them just because
I
they
would
get a
say
little bit more
yes.
specific?
So both of us have British backgrounds, right? And all the companies point to a strong UK, Ireland, Scotland type of ancestry. However, I find, and they have, the one thing that they have is very granular ethnicity analysis, right? Down to almost the county. They can say where you come from. I think it's a hammer and nail thing. They're British-based companies. I think everybody's British because if I look at my paper trail that I've been able to validate pretty well, I can believe that I'm probably 20% British, but they have me like at 60% British. Is way overrepresented, I think, because I know that I have Icelandic and Danish and German. I have all these other things that are not British, and we know that British is, there's a lot of confluence and mixing there that happened in the UK region. So I think they overrepresent your British ancestry, but they do have very granular analysis of that, which is more granular than anybody else to date. Now, I know some of the other sites, MyHeritage has done some more granular analysis, but Living DNA, if you know you're British, they have the most detailed analysis to date. Okay. And you can upload your data to them. You don't have to spit in the tube for them.
I didn't realize that. So that's kind of a cool thing. I think I'm gonna do that. And I encourage everybody to use GEDmatch, and that's been helpful for me. So, well, thank you. Is there anybody else? Any last questions?
We have a bunch of very positive comments, lots of thank yous from the online community.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So,
as you can tell, we're pretty passionate.
Yeah, we're pretty passionate about it. So.
Well, I mean, what can you say when you can see how powerful it is, Yep. So, well, thank you so much. And we'd just like to remind everybody that next month our meeting will be on the 11th of September. Lance McIntosh will be returning to update us on organizing temple and family history in your wards and stakes. And we do encourage you to invite your ward, temple, and family history consultants, priesthood leaders, anybody you can convince to take a look at this. Because everybody seems to, my experience with the leadership of various wards and things is that they don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And so we want to arm them with knowledge here. And we'll be having a second class that day on some Zoom techniques. So that will be a worthwhile session. We have all of our presentations planned through the end of the year, and you will not believe the persons that we have scheduled. So keep an eye on our website and on our blog. And thanks once again to Ken and Sheron for these presentations today. They left us a lot to think about, and maybe we ought to take some time tomorrow especially, and think about and pray about what we need to do next in this area to improve our genealogy and to answer our questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.